Welcome to Shadowy Secrets, where the veil between the living and the dead is razor thin, and the echoes of the past continue to haunt us today. I'm your host, Addie, and today we're diving deep into a story so terrifying, so drenched in real-life horror, that it has been whispered about for decades. What you're about to hear is no work of fiction. This story is based on real events, witnessed by those who lived to tell the tale, and some who didn't. This is the story of the haunting of the cursed estate. The year was 1978, and the Merrick family, a seemingly normal couple with their 2 young children, had just purchased their dream home in the quiet countryside of Tennessee. The house itself was a sprawling mansion, abandoned for nearly 50 years. The local townsfolk whispered about the place, but nobody dared to speak openly about its history. To the Merricks, the mansion was perfect, a sprawling 3-story house with large windows and acres of dense forest. It had been an unbelievable steal at the price they got it for, and they were eager to begin their new life. What they didn't know was the house had a dark past. A very dark past. A century before, it was owned by a reclusive and wealthy man named Jonathan Hargrave, who was known in the local town not for his wealth, but for his strange obsession with the occult. Hargrave had hosted countless seances, rituals, and, as some whispered, even human sacrifices in that very house. The house had been left abandoned after the mysterious disappearance of Hargrave and everyone who lived with him. The official records showed no proof of foul play, but the locals believed otherwise. Some claimed they saw strange lights flickering in the windows long after the place was supposed to be empty. Others swore they heard voices when passing by at night. But the Merricks were blissfully unaware of this. For them, it was just the start of a new chapter. At first, things seemed normal, as they always do in stories like this. The family settled in, unpacking their belongings and exploring their new home. But within days, strange things began to happen. At night, they heard scratching sounds coming from inside the walls, sounds that seemed to move with an unnatural speed from one end of the house to the other. At first, they blamed it on old pipes or rats, but there were no pipes in those walls, and no signs of rodents. One evening, as Mrs. Merrick was preparing dinner, the lights in the house flickered before plunging the entire mansion into darkness. The children, playing in the living room, suddenly began screaming. Their father rushed in, flashlight in hand, only to find them cowering in the corner, pale with terror. They both spoke at once, hysterical, talking over each other, but their stories matched. They said they saw a man, a shadowy figure with no face, standing by the fireplace, just watching them. When the lights came back on, the figure was gone. Mr. Merrick checked the entire house, every corner, every room, but found no sign of an intruder. The family convinced themselves it was just their imagination, but deep down, they knew something wasn't right. As the days went by, the strange occurrences became more frequent. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move, and cold spots would appear in random areas of the house. Mrs. Merrick started waking up at 3:15 a.m. every night, feeling like someone, or something, was watching her. She tried to shake it off as stress, but her unease grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, she stumbled upon something disturbing. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was an old, weathered diary. It belonged to one of the servants who had worked for Jonathan Hargrave. The entries were dated back to 1875, and the more she read, the more terrified she became. The servant wrote about rituals, dark and violent ceremonies that Hargrave would perform in the mansion's basement. The diary detailed how Hargrave would summon spirits, malevolent entities, to do his bidding. The last entry was the most chilling of all. It read, Hargrave has gone too far this time. He has opened a door that cannot be closed. The spirits are no longer under his control. They whisper to us in the dark, telling us to do unspeakable things. I fear we are all doomed. That night, Mrs. Merrick dreamt of the man the children had described, the faceless figure. Only this time, she saw him standing at the foot of her bed, whispering in a language she didn't understand. The next day, Mrs. Merrick confided in her husband about the diary, but Mr. Merrick was skeptical. He chalked it up to superstition, claiming that the house was old, and old houses make noises. But deep down, he knew something was wrong, too. He had been waking up with strange bruises on his arms and legs, and there were times when he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like someone was right behind him, breathing down his neck. As the family tried to go about their daily lives, the entity, or entities, became more aggressive. The youngest child, Sarah, began sleepwalking. Mr. Merrick would find her standing in front of the basement door, her hand hovering over the handle, trying to open it. When he asked her what she was doing, she would simply reply, "He's calling me." The basement was the one part of the house the Merricks had not explored. It was always locked, and they couldn't find the key. But after Sarah's strange behavior, Mr. Merrick decided to break the lock and see what was down there. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The basement was not a basement at all. It was a ritual chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols etched into the stone. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, stained with what looked like old blood. Surrounding the altar were several objects, ancient-looking candles, bones, and a tattered book bound in animal skin. As Mr. Merrick approached the altar, the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath came out in white puffs, and the air felt thick, oppressive. That's when he heard it, the faint sound of chanting. It was low at first, almost like a hum, but it grew louder with each passing second until it filled the room. The chanting was coming from inside the walls. Suddenly, the door to the basement slammed shut. Mr. Merrick rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. He pounded on it, shouting for his wife, but there was no answer. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and then the lights flickered and went out. He was plunged into total darkness, and that's when he saw them. Figures, shadowy, faceless figures, emerged from the walls, slowly making their way toward him. He could feel the air grow colder with each step they took. Their mouths were moving, still chanting, though he couldn't understand the words. His heart raced, and he backed up against the altar, trapped. Just as the figures were about to reach him, the lights flickered back on. The basement door swung open, and his wife was standing there, wide-eyed and terrified. But Mr. Merrick didn't speak. He couldn't. The experience had shaken him to his core. That night, he packed up the family, and they left the mansion, never to return. The Merrick family tried to go back to their normal lives, but they were never the same. They moved far away from Tennessee, but the shadows of the past followed them. Mrs. Merrick claimed she could still hear the chanting at night, and both children began having vivid nightmares about the faceless man. Years later, the mansion was sold once again, this time to a group of paranormal investigators. They hoped to uncover the truth behind the haunting. The team spent weeks in the house, setting up cameras and recording equipment. What they captured was chilling. On the final night of their investigation, the cameras in the basement caught something disturbing. A faint, shadowy figure, barely visible but unmistakable. The same faceless figure the Merrick children had described years earlier. The team also recorded strange, disembodied voices speaking in a language no one could identify. The footage was enough to convince the world that something was terribly wrong with that house. It was declared uninhabitable, and has been abandoned ever since. Some say the spirits of those who died during Jonathan Hargrave's rituals are still trapped there.